Welcome to another video colloquium of European societies in digital age. We have now another guest, Vasili Sofiadellis, who has been already guest in our convention last year. And if you maybe Vasili, if you like, just introduce yourself with a few words so everyone knows who's talking to us. You are talking from Lesvos, Greece.
I am indeed. Thank you very much, Sabia. It's a great pleasure to be in contact with you again. I'm Vasili Sofiadellis. I'm South African Greek. So I grew up in South Africa to Greek parents, and I've subsequently moved back to Greece. The main reason I've come back here is due to the refugee crisis. 4 years ago in 2015, I was here, and for several initiatives. And 3 years ago, I moved permanently. And one of the main reasons that made me move back here is because of the disconnect between the refugee, who a refugee was, and what their perception was from locals. My background, I'm a chartered accountant. I was at PwC. So I think that growing up in South Africa under the apartheid regime and coming here, living in two worlds, has allowed me to have some insights that being here during this crisis has allowed me to be able to understand a few things. So very involved in startups and digital technology, and there's this convergence of things that's happening. And so very much looking forward to this discussion following the colloquium last year that we had about European society in the digital age. And with the current crisis that's happening, I think a lot of the future of Europe, if you like, is here on these islands, being determined by this mass influx. We had 800,000 people. So that's just a brief background of some of the things we're doing. And so we're here to look to create an ecosystem to bring locals and refugees into contact, and seeing how we can use technology to find solutions and accelerate impact technologies, tech for good, if you like, to solve some of the challenges that are here on the ground, here in Lesvos.
Mm. Okay, Vasili, thank you. Tech for good. That's a good point. And as you said last year in the convention of the colloquium, we had several panels on migration, Heimat, nationalism, populism, hate speech, and on different points, on different panels, it popped up that this is all fear-driven. So we thought that the topic fear is really important subject that's underlying many things that are happening in Europe. So we want to dive a bit deeper into this subject. And we already had yesterday Fernando Vallespin, a political scientist from Madrid, a professor who was talking on this. And now we want to go on with you, Vasili. We can start with a question I also asked Fernando. Is there is a fear, but a fear for what? A fear of what? You said in the notes you sent yesterday, it's fear for change, and Fernando said, well, he thinks it's fear for future and fear for loss. So maybe you have a few comments on what you think, what kind of fear is underlying the migrant discourse.
Thank you very much. And yes, I most definitely strongly believe it's fear-driven. If I can just go a bit back to say in 2001 with September 11, we had this the whole world was talking about jihadists and Islam. And then 2015, with the mass influx of refugees, everyone here on Lesvos and across Europe was talking about jihadists coming into the whole of Europe. So for the first few months, everyone was talking about this. We had an incident in France, and every single person was expecting from around the world, the perception was that these people are all jihadists, frankly. And we see a year later, or 2 years later, 2 years after that, when people started meeting the Syrians, people then started saying, okay, yeah, the Syrians are actually pretty good. They really fleeing the war, but now all these migrants that are coming from Africa. So when people stopped talking about jihadists and explosions happening everywhere and terrorists coming into Europe, they then started changing the narrative to talk about these aren't refugees; they're all migrants that are coming into the country, or into the continent rather. So and what we have seen is that this mass influx of people, and from Lesvos perspective, in 2015, crime increased a lot. So, and from 2015 till now, there's been significant increase in crime, and this is petty crime. However, so let's say there's 1% of the population that's involved in criminal activity, and when I say petty, I mean theft and so forth. In a society where there was almost zero crime, very, very, very limited, the society starts talking about that 1%. And what you have here is people who don't lock their homes at all are suddenly fearful within their homes. So, and especially people that are not in contact with asylum seekers, they are the most fearful. And those are the ones, and their fear is, for them, their fear is real. So you find that there's complete disconnect between the reality and what the perception is of asylum seekers, because everyone's talking about the theft, and there's been a murder or two between asylum seekers that things have gotten out of hand again within a village. And then so everyone's talking about murder, and I want to add to that, because it is about the future in a big way, and this is why the colloquium you held last year was extremely relevant, and about the fourth industrial revolution, this rapid transformation and change that's happening in both governments and corporates that are actually, I would say, quite frankly, struggling to embrace this rapid change that's happening, the technology is bringing about, is causing additional fear or uncertainty of one's future. So the combination of these two things, I think we find, and the lack of, I would say, visionary leadership across the world. I think there are a few heads of states that are doing great things, but in general, I think there's a lack of a clear vision of how to embrace this change. And so we're finding people, the rise of populism and people using propaganda to win votes, and they're using the refugees and asylum seekers as the scapegoats. So I would, fear of loss, I think, is definitely relevant, because when with change, there's people that lose. If you late to embrace the change, you're going to be left out, and if you and it's all about the future. So I think they're all interlinked. So loss and the future and change is definitely what's of concern for people, because people want to be comfortable about the future, and with this mass migration and the digital transformation that's taking place, people are uncertain about their futures.
Yeah, Vasili, that is also what Fernando said yesterday, that the fear for technical change, rapid technical change that may change your own life. And it's a fear for change in terms of fearing that society changes to bad and not gets better, because changes, yes, you can change for good and change for better. And very interesting also what you said, the difference between rural and city ways of conditions. Maybe there's something important. I had Republica an interview with someone who was saying that yes, suddenly there aren't rural areas anymore in digital. And yes, another point is that what did Fernando? Yes, what you were saying in Lesvos, it's the real situation. You have the real fear of a very small island with very many foreign people coming without without solutions for that problem. So you said it's a kind of a realistic fear, or it's somehow it's 1%, but it's something that really changed. And what in the talk with Fernando yesterday, he said that in Eastern Europe, for example, the people who are afraid of migrants and of strangers, they don't have migrants, but they have fear for migrants. So that's an interesting point. That's also a fear where you have where you have governments who win the elections because they say, oh, all the migrants, but they don't have migrants, but they have the fear. So what is that fear? What do you think?
I've got goosebumps, Sabria, just listening to you. And the fear is the fear of the unknown, and it's driven by, in the news we hear the bad news. So the news only reports the bad news, and this is what people hear, and this is what people think. So you find places, rural areas that have not come into contact with refugees are the most opposed by far. I want to say Mytilene, this is a city that, for 10 years, economic crisis since 2009, 2015, 800,000 people passed there within a period of 20 months. Mytilene's got 32,000 people as a population, 800,000 people passed. The highest number per day was 11,000. Right now, 15%, no, about 20% of the population is made up of asylum seekers as we speak. And yet these people are still relatively supportive. In fact, the let's call it the extreme right party for the actual local elections is not actually even putting, there isn't anyone running for it, because the people have come into contact with refugees. By and large, refugees are walking around within the community. You're finding a lot of local people that are getting employment, that are interacting. So there's a lot more awareness. But if you go to the villages, it's a completely different narrative. And I think even in Athens as a city, and most certainly so across the whole of Europe, the perceptions that people have of the asylum seekers and the reality is completely, completely different. And I think this is something that people have to experience. It's not when you're reading books and listening to people speak. It might twist something, but it's something you can only understand by personal experience, and it's completely transformative. If I can share, in 2015, when I came to Lesvos, there must have been about 30,000 people at the harbor alone at that stage. And I was shocked. I was looking at the situation thinking, oh my goodness, what's going on? It was dirty, this. So for a whole week, although I was going to go and volunteer, for a whole week, I avoided speaking to any asylum seeker. We went to some, because I was hearing all the negative from friends and family, and I was like, oh, well, what did I get into? Went to Samos, met the first asylum seeker, and I can never forget it because he was fluent in English. He was more scared of me than I was of him. And just listening to him, I was like, what is happening here? It was like, I looked at this man and thought this could be me. And he was an industrial engineer. The second man was a surgeon. So those experiences just, and we were 22 people that went to go do a hackathon in 2015. And the experience was the same for everyone. Everyone was completely moved and, dedicated. A lot of they just felt compelled to they could not want to change that. And that reality for me was that experience, and then coming back to the village and seeing how people were responding and fearful of the asylum seekers and those discussions. I felt back then saying, it's super important for us to bring people into contact so we can change the perception, the incorrect perception that people have, which is critical. And it's the most difficult thing to, I think, actually to bring people together. How do you bring these two worlds in a mutually beneficial way that they can interact? You know, to say,
Yeah.
let's, yeah.
Yes, that is Vasily, what you said last year, that in the perception we think that refugees have lost their skills, but they haven't. They are like you said. This could be me with my skills and what I can do, and I think your approach is very good to use the skills that are there to solve the problems where asylum seekers themselves know where they are and what they need. I think that's a very good approach, and that is also where we can use digital means for, as you said, tech for good, for changing things into a good way. But you also addressed media reporting on the bad news and the good news. And do you think that digital space resonates fear or diffuse, hazy fear that's not concrete, not how do you say, coordinated with a real perception of having met people? So in terms of how it has been spread via social media, this unconcrete fear.
Yeah, definitely. So as I mentioned, you know, bad news sells, and so anything negative that happens is lifted onto social media, and in the coffee shops when people are sitting together having discussions, everyone's talking about what they saw on social media and what they read about in the news. It's a lot of it is true. So you know, if there was someone who got killed, or if someone there was theft and so forth, you know, so it's true, but this is what's communicated. And also I think when someone reports it and they want to be able to sell more news, to be able to get more advertising, the way they position it and communicate that, and wanting it to be shared more and more and more, it's exactly the objective is to be able to get more people to read it. So they put about all the negative things that are happening, and that spreads, and that's what people then know. You know, so people that don't come into contact are reading the news on the social media, which is not necessarily, it's not necessarily fake per se, but that's all we're talking about. We know they don't talk about the good things all in the same way, and then that starts having a discussion. So and then you find people that are leaders in the sense of community leaders that have also not come into contact with asylum seekers, that are pushing that and their agenda to be able to galvanize more votes for them to drive things on things that they are misinformed of. You know, so
that was indeed a question I wanted to ask now, Vasily. We see that we have this fear, this unconcrete fear, and being instrumentalized and misused. So I want to ask you, do you have thoughts on who misuses this fear and why?
This right now, sadly, it's we see it daily. It's, I mean, Trump used it, Brexit used it. If it was not for migration as an issue, as a talking point, you know, neither would have happened, nor Trump and nor Brexit. So everyone is using it for their own interests, their own political interests. It's not for the common of the people. And even here, and right now, which is a critical time, we have local elections, we have regional elections, and the European elections coming up. And right now, the biggest and the main talking point is the asylum seekers and the refugees. You know, the one side is saying we're going to close camps, we're going to chase away all the NGOs, because there's so much actual incorrect news that's being communicated here for people to, for own self-interest, all about having power. And how can they galvanize on the fear that they hear and they're talking about in the coffee shops, and they look to amplify that fear purely to win votes, purely.
Yeah,
Like,
that's Vasili. What Fernando also said. He said it's profitable in terms of votes. So yeah, that's really. I get goosebumps also. Yeah. Okay. So we have the same opinion on this. Also, Vasili and Fernando have. Yeah. That would have been my last question, but because you have been addressing it, I want to ask it now. How do you think that this fear will express itself in the European elections, in the upcoming European elections?
I've got goosebumps listening to you. We are at such a significant crossroad in our society. It's extremely, extremely concerning. And I think, again, we have to, being on the islands, on Lesvos, I want to say again, this is a society that 10 years was in economic crisis for 10-year period. 2015, when they were suffering a 6-year economic crisis, a different race, culture, and religion came to Europe and touched European soil for the first time on the Greek islands. How did Europeans respond? Europeans responded by understanding that these people's needs are greater than their own and gave a helping hand to support them. That message, right now, given the elections, no one is promoting that type of message. So I think it's important for people to start, kind of off my thoughts of exactly what the point I was making is, we need to, so yeah, people, so let me just go back. Sorry, what happened is 2015, the people on the ground, when the refugee crisis happened, the first people that mobilized were the locals in a massive way. Then the NGOs came, but more importantly, in one of the most beautiful villages, which is one of the most picturesque villages that many people visit. And I'm just trying to give you context of, I understand we're talking European-wide, but I want to give you context of what happened here. In the one village where people work for 4 months of the year, day and night, for their livelihoods and their families, what happened in 2016 was a 72% decrease in tourism. That was a massive impact. So you've got very influential people, that all of a sudden, all their livelihoods have come to a halt. And we've had these people who were, by and large, the strongest voice against asylum seekers, that in 2016 already, when you went to the village and you said, I want to go to that place, you have people saying, no, you can't go there. Why not? No, that's people who don't support asylum seekers, and you're like, what? So what's happened subsequently, the economic development on the islands is phenomenal. The amount of money that's coming to all the islands is phenomenal, but no one wants to speak about this. And there's two reasons. The one is, I think because the voices were so strong in 2016 against the asylum seekers, people are now, well, we can't now come and start saying, oh, the asylum seekers are good, it's been a good thing. But also from a superstitious perspective, people don't want to say that they're benefiting from other people's misery. So to be able to say, yes, the refugee crisis has been good for us, it's something that people feel strongly about, that they don't want to be able to come out and say, because this is how they kind of see it. And one more important thing, I think, is the shock, the real shock that happened with people here when you have 800,000 people coming over a 2-year period. People still feel that might happen, whereas now you might have, I don't know, 1,000 people, 1,500 people coming per month. At that stage in August, you're having 10,000 people coming per day. And I think that psychologically, when people feel powerless and just this massive migration movement, I think a lot of the things have just kind of left to fate. And worse, you've got the local community. I mean, the mayor, I have to say again, was phenomenal. This was a real leader who came under so much attack for his vision, who had the right vision. He came under so much attack from people, from the wealthy people that got so highly impacted in the north, that the hoteliers, that he pulled back completely and didn't have enough support from the ground to continue his vision. So I think for the future, so we've got municipalities saying it's the prime minister saying it's the European Commission, the European Union. So no one's taking the responsibility.
Scapegoats everywhere.
Exactly, and it is multifaceted. So it's such a challenging, because Sabria, from every person's perspective, if you look at it from each person's perspective, they're right. The refugees are right, the NGOs are right, the locals are right, the mayor's right. How do you find a balance for everyone?
Yes, but all that you're saying, Vasili, that points out that migration, like climate change and agrar reforms, and so are things, topics that you can't solve on a national level. You can't solve it on an island. You can't solve it on a national level, but you could find approaches on a European level. Without that chain of scapegoats that you said, everyone pointing at someone else who has to solve or doesn't or fails finding solutions.
So and I want to add what happened yesterday for Europe Day. A team came from the Vatican, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's Caritas, and they're announcing a movement of mayors and cities that are going to be welcoming asylum seekers. That's extremely powerful, and I think it should come down to individual voices, mayors, to be able to raise their voice and speak their mind, and we should celebrate the success stories of cities and villages that are embracing asylum seekers. I want to give you an example here on Lesvos. In the winter, they bring people from other countries to come and pick olives. So they pay for flights for people to fly in and pay for their accommodation and food to pick olives. We've got 8,000 to 10,000 people in the camp and in the city as well. And instead of so there's a need for work, but instead of going and approaching the people and bringing those people in, because there's fear, and especially in the villages, they rather fly people in from other areas. So I think it's definitely we are, as individuals, that need to drive things. Mayors are the most and getting mayors should welcome individuals and look to galvanize them. And what makes me hopeful for our future is social entrepreneurship. With co-working spaces as communities, there's massive communities that are looking to co-create solutions, and that's what it's all about. It's about collaboration, co-creation, working together. So how do we galvanize across Europe these communities through co-working spaces as hubs in each city, that in those cities you can welcome the asylum seekers and look to integrate them in a way that's mutually beneficial to the locals. So I think we really need to focus on empowering locals to support asylum seekers. So this narrative of supporting refugees, yes, but let's focus on supporting locals that want to start creating new kind of businesses, and especially our youth, in partnerships with universities, that we challenge universities to be able to welcome asylum seekers at co-working spaces, community centers, and look to co-create solutions together. And even if you put in programs, incubation and acceleration programs, I'm not sure how many of our readers are familiar with startups, with the startup ecosystem, but with these community centers, if we can use those as areas where we put programs that have incubation programs for entrepreneurship, where you bring locals and refugees together, even if those businesses are not successful, it will be a catalyst for other initiatives. I just want to highlight this point. For example, there's people that were running a chain of restaurants in Syria, as an example, and they come into a city and they don't know what to do. Where could they go on once a month to go present their ideas or their experience to a community that would have impact investors and people that could say, okay, we like what you're saying. Here's a space for you to work in. Here's a team that will look to support you. And if you prove your business, through through brainstorming, through workshops, if the people feel these guys are can take the next step, you look to fund them. So
Okay.
it's this movement of social tech entrepreneurs. So I think
Yeah, this would be a way, as you said, a way to embrace change. Um, Yes, and I think really it's interesting to see Europe-wide this different kinds of fear, yet especially because we have you now from the migration perspective, where like you on your island Lesvos, where you have the real problems, and what Fernando said in Eastern Europe, where you have similar fears without having migrants. And what he said, and so he was talking from Madrid, but he's working on politics, and he knew what happens in Eastern Europe. And he said that why don't people start talking about emigration, because their problem is not migration. It's not people coming from other countries. It's their own people leaving their own country to have a good education somewhere else and stay away. So Hungary, Bulgaria, or what so on. And that is an interesting question. So you build a fear around migration, but your real problem is immigration of your own people. What do you think of that idea?
to be talking about, so just to understand your idea, you're saying like from Eastern Europe, and I mean Greece is the same. Many of the youth have emigrated to go into other countries, but I'm not sure exactly. So are you saying we should be talking about our youth that have left, or because I mean what I think about that, it's people are actually saying our youth, our people have left because there aren't any job opportunities. How are there going to be job opportunities for these people? Again, the people that have left are yeah. So I'm curious to understand how the discussion was yesterday of how Fernando sees.
I will send you the link. I will connect both parts
Okay.
of the discussion. Yes, yes. It's a bit like in the migration discourse. The migration discourse is a scapegoat for problems, for real problems you have, and it's like a nationalism. It's maybe, what do you think? Is nationalism fear driven?